The soil was as soil should be. Black, moist, oozing, decayed, ancient, carrying corpses. I began gardening without knowing I was beginning to garden. I felt as if I was merely wallowing in the black ooze, dancing with the corpses, emptying my tears into it, perhaps softening my own grave. I was black as tar. Somehow, oddly, in a way I could have hardly foreseen, much less planned, all my churning magically evolved a purpose. The purpose moved in my head from vagueness to certainty. I was preparing a garden. From this muck I found myself in, things of beauty would grow. And that is when I met the gardener. He seemed both young and old, strong and sturdy to the point that there was no need to loudly announce either strength or sturdiness. He was who he was. He was both man and tree. I would quickly grow to love this gardener, this tree man. First, because I recognized a great wisdom in him. Foremost, because he had the rare talent of getting me to laugh at myself when I most needed a laugh. The gardener saw me as I was, flaws and all, and took it all in stride. Not judging, never doubting that together we could cultivate a garden that would bloom and blossom with beauty and bounty to spare. The first tree was song. You need a voice, the gardener told me. You need to learn to say your own name, without it sounding like an apology. And so we planted a song tree, the gardener and I. And from deep beneath the soil of the garden, my voice began to rise. It was a voice that I had released only rarely, spontaneously and unrehearsed when standing before waterfalls. It was a voice that had taken me by surprise once. The voice of a tribal elder, standing before a beautiful waterfall and thanking Mother Earth through song for constructing such beauty and awesomeness from the barest and most basic of materials, water, sound, rock, gravity, but so much more than these. When that voice arose spontaneously from me, it sang a song from a different time, perhaps a former life. It was not the voice I used in my everyday world, where I said my name as if inviting the listener to forget it immediately, to forget me immediately. It was that voice, that rarer voice, mellifluous and mighty, that grew inside the tree that was planted by the gardener and me. As the song tree began to bear fruit, it was a magnificent thing to see. Some songs caught the sun and shone more brightly. Some dropped early and splashed the ground with gorgeousness, nourishing the soil. All perfumed the garden with the aroma of truth and sincerity. And that brought the birds. They came, they sang, they feasted, and they emptied themselves. And though this was not pretty, it was life. And life has purpose. Thus, just as the gardener knew it would. The song tree began a cycle of life in the garden that made it possible for many plants to flourish and many birds to gather. The garden grew more delightful day by day. And then, one day, a lover came to visit. Many of the songs of the song tree had been songs of longing. Had she heard them from a distant place? Some of them were memories of a love out of time, sung to a long-lost lover with whom I had once walked the earth. A different me, perhaps the shaman of the waterfall, a man who felt good and strong when saying his own name. Was it she? I think such questions are better when pondered rather than answered. It may have been her, or perhaps she merely brought the flavor of one who dwelt deep in my memory. Whoever she was, she appeared, and at the right time, when I had a garden to show her. I introduced myself with the voice, the strong voice that I had cultivated there, the voice the gardener had told me I needed but hadn't told me why. I said my name, not apologizing for it, not hoping she would soon forget it, wanting her to remember it and to know me. Naked as Adam and Eve, we chased each other around that garden, not about to be outdone by monkeys or squirrels in playfulness and brashness. The sun golden honeyed our skin as we made love upon a carpet of moss. And when the stars came out and the fireflies circled and meandered, our bodies became canvases for punctuations of light, and our eyes flashed and took everything in, and my garden became our garden. For a time. And that time passed. And when she left, it was back to the gardener and me. And he said, "Seasons come to love, just as they come to this garden, and the garden weathers them. One should never expect that a garden will be ablaze with color and in its glory at all times. What has lived and thrived in this garden has given it beauty, and for that we can be grateful. And what has died here has given it food, and for that we can be grateful as well." And that was all the gardener said. So I walked to the song tree and sat down with it bracing my back and fed it with my tears. Winter brought sleep to the garden. The gardener placed his hand, a last glow of warmth before the cold was all, upon my shoulder and mused, "Do you suppose this garden will dream during its long sleep? And if it does, what visions of itself will it behold? This garden," I thought, "can dream from the depths to the heights. Its roots delve deep into the darkness, where bones and claws scratch it, while its upper branches gently touch the moon and the sun, and trace clouds that move like ships. When I dreamt of her, and I dreamt of the garden, and in my dreams the garden was still ours. The gardener knows that I don't like to pull weeds from the soil. They are life too. They have a right to be here. I feel that I become heartless and tyrannical during weeding, and fear that life disapproves, and that perhaps karma awaits. Who might one day consider me a weed, pull me out by my roots, so one better and more beautiful than I can have room to thrive. The gardener assures me I am overthinking. You are looking after a garden, he says, and a gardener who is reluctant to weed is no gardener at all. You may argue that the weeds have a right to life, but then don't be surprised when they have taken over and you've no garden worth showing, merely a tangle of weeds. Living things do have rights, but you surely have the right to sculpt your vision of what the garden should be, using life and its offerings as your raw materials. There is a responsibility to choose wisely when pruning, when weeding, when selecting what goes and what remains. But a gardener embraces rather than shirks this responsibility. It is better to live with one's choices than to live without choosing. This garden never ceases to surprise me. It can look as it always does, and yet still I find something there I hadn't noticed before. It can be the light adding color or the wind adding dance, but something reveals a charm and a depth I hadn't previously noticed. Or it can look new all of a sudden. A plant can seem to appear in a single day unplanned, seeds carried by wind, but making itself at home. While making its new home more authentically itself, a sapling can grow twice as tall, and a young bird family can nest there, adding new voices to the choir, before I, supposedly in control, even had time to memorize the score. So I weed and I prune, but I also leave room for surprise and discovery. And as the garden shifts, deepens, intensifies, explores, and expands, its continuing story of possibility leaves me spellbound. And now I am old, younger by far than the gardener, who seems never to age, but older by a stretch than I pictured myself ever being when I first blackened myself with the soil that has exploded into this garden. And I will die here someday. And perhaps this garden will wither, and the song tree will no longer bear fruit, and the birds will leave, and nothing will remain but the soil, and the gardener, the tree man, until a young one comes along to bring it back to life. And perhaps that young one will be me, and perhaps then the lover will return to share my garden with me once again.